Electrifying the future. The battle over electric vehicles in America.
I am driving the Chevy Bolt. It's worth the effort that you're taking to save the environment.
I just am apprehensive about the battery being stranded.
The two leading presidential candidates divided on the issue.
We've quadrupled the number of electric vehicles sold.
They don't go far. They're all going to be made in China.
Michigan's auto industry at a crucial crossroad.
EV is part of the future of mobility. Michigan needs to be at the cutting edge of that transformation.
The EV transition, why it's become a partisan issue, and how it's shaping the election. The path to the White House drives right through the critical swing state of Michigan and the Motor City. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Mike Duffy. The future of electric vehicles and the infrastructure to sustain them is one of the major issues dividing the presidential candidates and one of the issues that will be driving people to the polls in November, which is why we're hosting a town hall discussion here at the incredible New Lab Detroit on the campus of the redeveloped Michigan Central Station. We have put together a panel of 6 people who have a variety of opinions on electric vehicles, both for and against. We'll dive into our conversation in just a moment. But first, I want to talk about this complex here in Corktown, Detroit, dedicated to the future of mobility. The New Lab Detroit building was the book depository for Detroit public schools in the 60s and 70s, but now it serves as a high-tech startup ecosystem, attracting brilliant minds from all over the world. I'm surrounded by some incredible technology here, like the all-electric quad off-road vehicle called the Levac, which aims to create a cultural shift in the off-roading community by moving away from fossil fuels. There's also the Hive, which aims to revolutionize food shipping. These large containers are covered in solar panels and helps ship food in a climate-controlled setting. And the Michigan Future Mobility Plans aims to install 100,000-volt post-electric chargers by the year 2030. Thank you, everyone, once again for being with us here. Now, I want to start with the EV owners. What do you actually like about owning an EV? Let's start with you, Hannah.
My favorite thing is not going to the gas station anymore. I can't tell you the last time I stopped and pumped gas, and it's really convenient to just be able to continue with my day and not have to worry about when I'm going to fill up. Okay. Natalia?
I think similar to Hannah, I think being a woman, it's always a little more scary going to the gas station, you know, since the safety is always kind of questioned there. And so not having to go to the gas station relieves a lot of stress financially as well as for safety reasons.
Anything you want to add?
I just love the storage available. There's a lot of room. There's 2 trunks. And I also love not having to stop at the gas station.
Okay, well, in a poll with the Associated Press, 4 in 10 U.S. adults said range was a major reason not to buy an EV. So as early adopters, have you guys seen any problems so far?
I've been driving my EV for about a year and a half, and I noticed that in the winter I do get less miles, but I also own multiple vehicles, so I use mine mostly for local commuting. So the range really isn't a problem, but I can get over 300 miles on a charge. So I feel like that does take you pretty far.
Similar, I've been driving my EV for about a year now and use it as our primary commuter. We are fortunate in that we have a charger at our home. So I can see where range anxiety can be a thing for people that don't have that luxury. But I also have managed to be able to get twice the EPA rating out of our vehicle in our commute.
Okay, well, according to a new survey with AAA, only 18% of adults said that they were likely to buy an EV for their next vehicle, and 63% said they were unlikely to buy an EV. So for those of you who have been thinking about it or maybe a little hesitant, is there any reason you haven't bought one?
Yeah, I pull a camp. My son lives several states away, 1,500 miles away. If I'm pulling my camper across the country, going from Detroit to Chicago is 4 hours, then I have to stop and charge for 4 hours. Also, I have another concern about in this area where I live in Waterford, we have 37 lakes. If I'm putting a boat in the lake with an electric vehicle, how's that going to work? That might not be a good thing. Electricity and water, you know, so that's one of the things I have concerns about.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that. Terrence?
I'm not entirely hesitant to buy an EV, especially since, like, currently we own 3 cars between me and my wife. Now, I would be willing to, say, trade one of those for an EV, but if we didn't have multiple cars, I would not be willing to make that sacrifice, primarily because I like to go on road trips. And as someone who is used to driving trucks, I don't like to stop unless absolutely necessary. So if, like, say I helped my little brother move to Florida. We was able to make that drive from Detroit to Fort Lauderdale in 24 hours. Can't exactly do that in an EV. And whereas on the other hand, I work less than 10 miles from my house. So as like a daily work commuter, it'd be perfect.
Now, another major concern is the price of EVs. While the price of new EVs are decreasing, the cost is still more than a gas-powered car. According to Cox Automotive, in April, the average cost for a new one was just over $55,000, while the average price for a gas-powered car came in at nearly $45,000. So feel free to weigh in, even if you have bought an EV. How much of a hurdle is cost when considering an EV?
Well, you know, Ford, when he started the Ford Motor Company, he wanted a car that every person, all of his employees could afford. That's not the case anymore. Even with the trucks are $70,000. How's his average employee going to be able to afford that? And then the EVs are more expensive than the regular cars. They're not making it for the average man anymore. It's a house payment.
Yeah.
I do understand the cost of the EV is higher, but in the first year that I owned my EV, the only maintenance that I had to do was one air filter and tire rotations. And since I charge my vehicle at home, the cost to charge is about 4 cents a mile, which is significantly cheaper than what you pay per gallon for gas.
So you feel like it's somewhat offset?
So I feel like it balances out in the end.
And speaking from experience, buying an EV, we were buying at the height of the market where used cars were insane prices, and we were looking at between a hybrid Maverick gas vehicle and the Bolt EUV that we now drive. And actually, with the tax credit incentives and everything that we were able to get in purchasing the Bolt, that ended up shaking out to be a much cheaper option for us in the long run. And again, to echo the maintenance, we don't have oil changes, we just have the air filters and the tire rotations, which makes the cost of ownership much easier.
When it comes to those incentives, tax breaks, things like that, does that help move the needle, or what more would you need in terms of a tax break?
I think I appreciated this past year that it was a point of sale credit this time around, which took the cost down initially because I had to think in, for myself as well as people that, my peer group, and I'm having the conversations, it may not hit them the same as far as tax liability. So you may not get the same savings if it was on the tail end as it was previously. But I think it helped, with the initial costs substantially. So it will kind of make it a mid-market vehicle, but I also factor in my living condition where, I am my only responsibility. And so I don't want to take that away from, other families who are living, with other, different financial circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of costs, whereas, like with the incentives and everything, the cost is nice now, but my question is, what about 20, 30 years down the line? It's one thing to only have to pay for, you said, air filter and rotate tires. What about when the battery pack goes out? Mm-hmm. Or if something happens and your entire infotainment center is now kaput?
I do want to turn now to politics. It always comes back to politics in the end, doesn't it? Are you guys surprised that EVs have become such a political issue?
No.
Tell me why.
The red states, they just want to control everybody. The blue states, we're more open-minded, but that's my theory. They want to control you. But, control is part of this because once they get everybody on the electric, they can flip the button and control the whole country by shutting it down. I believe.
All right, that's a hot take. Anybody else want to weigh in?
You can't exactly pump your gas when the power's out. So there's also that.
Or if foreign relations go real south with OPEC or with Canada or any other oil-producing countries, it's, we lived through multiple points where gas was well north of $5 a gallon, and even now in parts of the country, it's still well north of that. It's all a delicate balance that goes on, and I would rather have the ability to have some level of sustainability of plugging into, say, solar panels at my house and directly charge my car and be self-sustaining that way, as opposed to relying on foreign countries that might not be friendly to us in the near future.
Okay, we're the largest oil producer in the world, and you're going back to control that way. Well, the price of electricity, you get everybody on electric, guess what? Supply and demand, electric prices are going to go way up. And not everybody can afford solar panels. And in Michigan, it's really not a great place to have solar panels. I mean, it's in the summer it is, but rest of the year it's cloudy.
A diversified energy source for all of America is a priority.
I agree with that. I agree with that. But all they got to do is flip the switch, and electric prices are going to go up as well.
Same with oil.
Yeah. Well, I agree. So let's make ethanol. Let's do it more clean, or hydrogen.
I think we have to be open-minded to all of our energy sources, simply because we don't have the infrastructure, and I don't think that we will get it in totality to be fully dependent on just electric or solar energy. I think a lot of our infrastructure is built to incorporate oils and things of that nature, and so it's going to be a while until we can make a full shift if we determine that that is what makes the most sense, right? Because there has to be just a check and balance, so if we can do less with the carbon footprint, that could maybe balance out and help us humans that will be occupying this space for the next, let's say, 50 to 100 years. And then after that, we have to start figuring out what the next phase is and what building looks like. It's not just let's have this conversation about cars. We have to start looking outside of that. Like, environmental justice is a big issue, and it goes into how we constructed this building, the materials that we put in there, the products that were there. So,
and I'm glad you mentioned carbon footprint, because I know, like, the process it takes to mine all the minerals to make the lithium-ion batteries that are in EVs. I feel like, because I know a lot of countries, and even I know like California is moving towards a point where all new vehicles sold there must be EVs at some point. I do feel like at some point in the future that will be sustainable. Today just isn't that day. Maybe we might have to discover some better technology than the current lithium that we have now. When that'll be, who knows?
Flux capacitor.
So Trump says that he is going to end Biden's push for EVs, and Biden says that EVs are the future. What do you think about that discussion? Do you have a position on either way?
I think it's more important about what the market will bear out. We can speak from an American perspective all we want, because right now, EV purchase rates are only hovering around 8% for the United States, but globally it's much closer to 17, 18% and increasing year over year. And it's important that if we want to have an economy of the future, that we're still producing things that are sold in the future. If we want to be a part of that system and economy, right now, Tesla might be the #1 global automaker for electric vehicles, but numbers 2 through 5 are all Chinese brands. And that's money that's not coming into our economy.
So what do you think the next administration needs to do when it comes to EVs?
I feel like the current deadline that I believe was California and was it the UK, I think? I don't remember what the year is, but it's fast approaching, where, like I was saying, they're trying to make it so that any new vehicle sold there will have to be EV. And I feel like that it almost makes people feel like, well, you have to go get an EV. You don't have a choice. And now, since people are being told what to do, it's like, well, I don't want one at all now.
Hannah, you look like you want to say something.
I think the right direction to take this would be diversifying our transportation abilities. So less reliance on gas-powered vehicles and having that be an option for those that, say, commute. And that is a logical, makes sense kind of thing logistically. Because, to be honest, fossil fuels are not a sustainable method of going, and not everybody can purchase EVs right now. They are expensive. They are introductory costs that people can't really achieve right now. But I think if we were to push it more as a diversification, and while doing that, making sure that the infrastructure can take on the additional EV owners, I think that would be the suggestion that I would make to the administration at this time.
I think they should push the hybrids for a longer period of time before just making everybody trying to make everybody switch over to the EVs. I think that's a great idea. If they came up with better ways of charging the battery as you're driving, that would make a lot more sense to me.
And there does seem to be some appetite for that.
Yeah.
But speaking of infrastructure, billions have been earmarked for a variety of projects. Here in Michigan alone, $110 million in funding has been designated for building out the EV charging network. So I wanted to see where our state stands relative to the country, understand why the issue has become so political, and learn what needs to happen to make EVs a reality. Let's all take a look.
I'm determined that the future of electric vehicles will be made in America by union workers.
On day one, I will immediately terminate Joe Biden's insane electric vehicle mandate.
The lines have been drawn, and the EV future has become a contentious political issue. But for Detroiter Nico Sorrell, he's just waiting to see how things unfold.
If they could build that infrastructure, yeah, I'll be a part of the future. But if they don't, I guess I'll just be a silly guy in the present, thinking there was a future.
This is the Motor City.
Right.
Are we far enough ahead when it comes to EVs?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
He tells me the state needs way more chargers. Fortunately, people like David Baylor are doing just that.
We're installing the new V4 charging stations for Tesla.
He knows the technology has become a political flashpoint and tells me he's heard it all from people who stop by to speak their mind.
You get a little bit of both sides of the spectrum. You know, you get the people who are diehard lovers of them, and you get the people who are a little against them.
He works in many states installing chargers, so I asked him how Michigan compares.
I think Michigan is a little behind on the EVs, honestly.
And he explained to me that it's not just about plopping chargers anywhere. He says most people don't consider the energy grid infrastructure.
Some of the areas that we're installing these charging stations, the grid, you know, the power companies and stuff didn't plan for this when they built, you know, the power lines or the underground services and utilities and whatnot.
I don't think Michigan's any better or any worse than any of the other states from that level of infrastructure.
Ian Hiskins is a professor emeritus in electrical engineering and computer science at the University of Michigan. I posed the same question to him about how Michigan compares to other states when it comes to EVs. Are there any challenges that we have in particular here in Michigan?
Well, yeah, the weather, the cold weather, and it's not just Michigan, anywhere across the northern states, right? The cold weather really decimates battery charge.
In fact, AAA found when the temperature dropped to 20 degrees, average driving range decreased a whopping 41%. It was a reality we reported and many drivers came to grips with just this past winter. Lines at charging stations around Detroit and the upper Midwest.
They're actually waiting to get to one of these charging stations over here.
Dr. Hiskins says there's a real cost to getting the entire industry off the ground.
As the population of vehicles grows, then the price can kind of drop in the longer term. But up front, it's a big transition for the manufacturers.
And demand has changed the approach of the Detroit 3. At the end of 2023, the automakers announced they would be reducing, pausing, or scaling back production and EV plans. And then there's the problem with the reliability of the electrical grid infrastructure.
DTE is a little bit notorious in that sense. And, you know, it's something that people are talking about, that you end up transferring, you know, resilience of the electricity network becomes resilience of the transport network.
In other words, if the electricity goes down, suddenly transportation does too. I reached out to Zachary Kolodin, Michigan's Chief Infrastructure Officer, to better understand what's currently underway in the state. He explained the state received $110 million from the bipartisan infrastructure law to complete a statewide network of fast chargers along Michigan's highways. 4 superchargers are planned every 50 miles. Additionally, the governor has proposed $25 million in state funding for additional chargers in community districts, and
Governor Whitmer proposed $20 million to support fleet conversions. So this is money designed to help, say, a local government take their maybe parking enforcement fleet and convert it over to EV.
He says Michigan is taking steps to shore up the electrical grid, but acknowledged we have work to do.
The U.S. is coming out of a long period where we didn't have a lot of electric load growth, and we also didn't have a lot of growth in our manufacturing sector. And I think the lack of growth in the manufacturing sector in this country hurt Michigan, but that is turning around.
I asked him where Michigan stands when it comes to the political debate about the EV future.
We want to be competitive in a global marketplace, right? So if the rest of the world is building high efficiency EVs and selling them into large growing marketplaces around the world, and the US is not, that's going to be bad for Michigan. I do think Michigan is particularly well equipped for the EV future because we have the Detroit 3. We have an incredible amount of engineering, scientific, intellectual product development talent in Michigan. I think we now recognize that in order to dominate the next century of manufacturing and mobility, we have to shift toward future technologies.
Okay, so as you saw there, Michigan definitely has some advantages, but do you guys see any problems with EVs particular to Michigan? Maybe with those of you who have EVs.
I will say the cold weather was kind of a challenge in terms of having range anxiety during this past frigid stint that we had this winter. But having said that, I think the technology is only going to get better, especially in this area with how much engineering knowledge we have going into this industry. I'm hopeful that those are challenges that will be able to be overcome.
I think the infrastructure issues with the grid and then lead into a larger conversation around mobility and public transportation as a whole. I know that Michigan suffers from that as well. So trying to think about what's the place for EVs right now, right? That's the question on everyone's mind. The answer is that we have to do this gradually. It's not something that can happen overnight, right? We can't only talk about mobility as far as infrastructure. We have to talk about all the entire ecosystem, right? The video talked a lot about like globalization, right? You look at other countries and what they're doing. It's not just with the vehicles, right? Their whole cities are, you know, a little bit more futuristic and, you know, they're taking technology a step ahead. I do appreciate, right, the building that we're sitting in right here in Detroit, the new lab, right? That's taking that step toward what we don't even know is possible, so.
Now, speaking of Michigan, currently Tesla is the #1 automaker in the country in the U.S. Does this need to change? Do we need to bring it back to Michigan?
I would like to see it brought back to the state of Michigan. Growing up in this area, we have such pride in the Big Three and for how long it's been around and sustained these communities, and it would be really, really nice to see that stateside and also in the state of Michigan.
As a Detroiter born and raised, I would love to see it brought home or to see just some advancement in what the Big Three are doing.
So in May, President Biden announced that he's imposing a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles to protect American manufacturers from China's unfair trade practices. Is this the right move for U.S. manufacturers?
I think so. We need to, if we're going to have them, we need to build them ourselves right here in Detroit.
If we're going to post tariffs, I think that we have to also hold our own accountable because we can't make progress without doing so. So I would love to see more legislation to hold the manufacturers, the U.S. manufacturers, accountable.
Another thing why I would like to see the Big Three, all come out on top and be up there with Tesla, if not past Tesla.
I also wanted to bring up the point that a couple years ago, there was a huge push, especially through the Detroit 3, to promote EVs. At the end of 2023, we saw this pullback. They decided they were going to produce less EVs. They decided they were going to invest less, and we even saw some more push toward hybrid vehicles. Does that move concern you guys?
I think it definitely raises a flag, right? Because I'm a consumer. I don't study this day in and day out, and so I guess my question is, what is the science behind it? What have the numbers shown? What have the data shown that would make them pull back, right? I would love to increase research in, our infrastructure as a whole to see what the next steps are, because we can't just put a product out there and not be able to sustain. It's like if they gave us the gasoline-powered vehicles and no gasoline, it would be like, how do we sustain this, right? I know everyone goes back to like, this is our normal, but we had to go from horse and carriage to Model T. So there's always going to be a transition period, and we just don't know what this one looks like.
And I think that's a good point to bring up, because you say from carriage to Model T, and it's playing off the misattributed quote of Henry Ford saying, giving the people what they want, it would be faster horses. And there is that sense of mixed messaging that you get where they said, this is what we're transitioning to, but then they backpedal and they're like, wait, can we still sell some horses before we transition over to the actual vehicles? And that it can definitely be frustrating, but there are many mileposts that we have to cross along that way to get to that point.
And we are kind of looking at it as all or nothing. Should we be considering hybrids right now?
I think so. I think they're trying to push the EVs too much on people, and that the total price to buy an EV, average Joe can't afford it.
So you're nodding your head, Gavin.
And that is definitely an important part of the transition process. But you can relate it to many different things that we've seen through the past. It's when the Sony Discman came out, no one threw away their Sony Walkman quite yet. There's that level of pickup that takes gradual time. And you can bring up things like the electrical grid isn't prepared for it. But people also said the same thing about air conditioners back in the 60s. And in 1960, we only produced 0.76 trillion kilowatt hours of energy. But you fast forward to the year 2000, and we produced 3.5 trillion kilowatt hours of energy. That's a 500% increase, but really when you break it down year by year, that's only 4% every year that it increases. So that transition can happen over a several-year time span, but it still seems like a blink of the eye.
And I want to touch on that question exactly. Do you think our grid is capable of sustaining an EV future?
Today, no.
I have concerns about it as it stands currently.
Yeah, with today, I think a full EV future is scary. And that's why I think like having options like hybrid and then offering the gas powered motor to the people that prefer that, everybody should be able to buy what they prefer. And there are a lot of opinions on the topic, but I think the infrastructure is definitely not there for every household to be having EVs.
How important is the environment in your decision, especially those who have bought it?
I think I felt like with the purchase that I was making a small, change or having a small impact on the environment. So that was a small decision. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. I try to use reusable grocery bags. I make my coffee at home so that I'm not using disposable cups. I really like trying to be as clean as possible did factor in to wanting an EV. And my husband's a Ford technician. He was really against EVs. He's been, wrenching on cars for 24 years. He did not want an electric vehicle. But once I drove the Mach-E, I absolutely loved it. And then once we had one in our house, he's fallen in love with it too.
So EVs are in line with your life philosophy?
Yes.
Okay. I guess the last question I really have for all of you is the EV future inevitable?
Yes.
Yes.
I would say yes. I think that I don't think we will see a full EV future in our lifetime, but I think we are on a path where EVs will be more prominent, but diversification is kind of where we should, kind of keep our wheels turning at.
I don't know that this country's ever going to go 100% EV. I just don't see a lot of people ever buying one.
Yeah, I wouldn't say 100. Probably like how today, actually, I just took my daughter to a car show recently. I have a picture of her in a working, functioning Model T. So while everything else on the road is now electric or fuel injected, there's bound to be some people who are still love wrenching on cars, and they'll have their old internal combustion engine vehicles that they break out for, cruises and car shows and stuff like that.
And of course, this is the Motor City, so the real question is, are we going to lead or are we going to follow in that regard, right?
I think we need to lead, and we're not quite there yet.
Okay, well, I will leave it at that. Now, Michigan is a small piece of the American pie, and we know that different issues arise for different states. We hope that this discussion helps you make a more informed decision before heading to the polls this November. I want to thank our guests for joining us and New Lab Detroit for allowing us to host our town hall discussion in their incredible facility here. Remember, you can read more about Michigan and its goals for the electric vehicle infrastructure right now on our website, WXYZ.com.